Well, this was meant to be 1 week in our series on Jesus in the Old Testament, and now we're on our 3rd week. So, good thing about that is that week where I prepared all this material was a busy week. But since then, I've had time for other things. And those who have preached know what a blessing that can be. And we are going to try to finish up this part of it tonight. But that doesn't mean if you don't have a comment or you have a question, feel free to bring that up as we study together. Just by way of review, remember we talked in Genesis chapter 3 about how sin came into the world and the promise that was made, the difficulty that there was going to be between the seed of woman and the seed of Satan. And the seed of Satan was going to bruise the heel, but the seed of the woman was going to crush the serpent. And we saw that that word seed is a critical term in the book of Genesis, used 59 times just in the book of Genesis. And most of them have to do with the patriarchal tribes as you go through there. And so in other words, what we're seeing is that preservation of the seed. And we talked about what that is. And we talked about the immediate threat to the seed. Genesis chapter 4, Cain killed Abel. And then God gave Eve another son. And remember what she said about him? It was of the Lord. This is the seed now. So she even recognized, all right, this is something special about this son. And then we looked at the flood, and then we especially looked at the descendants of Shem, because that's the line through whom the seed is going to come. And we paid close attention to a man by the name of Terah, who would give birth to a man by the name of Abram, later to be changed Abraham. That's where we left off last week. And then we saw the promise that was made to Abram, that the seed of Abraham are both the recipients of God's blessings and the instruments through whom God's blessings are passed on to others. God's covenant with Abraham promised blessings for all, not just the Jews. And that's an important part, especially with our friends in the community and others who maybe don't quite understand. You know, the law of Moses was added to this law because of their sin, because of the hardness of their hearts, to bring them to Christ. It was never intended to be the law that would bring salvation to the people. It was added. But this is the original promise, that all nations of the earth be blessed. And that's man, woman, black, white, any tribe, any country, any people, all people of the earth shall be blessed through the promised seed that was going to be coming. And then man's response to Abraham's seed would determine whether they were blessed or cursed. And then the Abrahamic covenant does not yet make clear that the seed of Abraham is Jesus. But then we looked at that, and we saw through several different verses, and let me just give those to you in case this is your first time in this class. Romans 16, verse 20. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. So that's Romans 16, 20. Galatians 4, 4. Galatians 3, 13 through 18. That's really the key right there, and that makes it plain. Not as seeds as of many, but seeds. And what is that seed? Christ. Galatians chapter 3, 13 through 18. It includes also the church. Romans 4, 13. Then Romans 4, 16 through 18. And then Galatians 3, 8. You get all that? And so then we trace the seed to Abram and Sarai in Egypt. What happened in Egypt when they went there? You remember what happened with Abram and Sarai? What was Abram concerned about? That's right. And so he said, lie. That's right. Nice looking woman. That's exactly what. And so he said, lie about it. Say, you are my sister. And then so Pharaoh did take her. And that threatened the purity of the seed, didn't it? And so God caused him to be punished. Why have you dealt with me? Take your wife and get out of here. And then questions about Eliezer in Genesis chapter 15. Remember, okay, I'm getting old. My wife is getting old. I've got no seed in our house. Is it going to come through my servant, my chief servant, Eliezer? Is it going to come through him? And then remember that covenant was made with Abram again. He said, you remember, take those animals, split them in two. And then remember how Abram had to stay there and chase the birds away and all of that. And then the furnace of smoke came through those animals. And you remember what that meant? Whoever broke that covenant, whatever happened to those animals would be brought upon you. You know, they had some interesting covenants back then, didn't they? The way to seal a covenant, you know, now we sign on a dotted line and maybe give some collateral. We read about, you know, at times where he said, you put your hand under my thigh. This is one that I think would really get my attention. If I was going to get a loan on a house or a car or whatever it was, and the real estate agent or the car dealer says, all right, go out there and get you an animal, bring it here, and I'll cut it in half, and I'll walk through it, then you walk through it, and whichever of us breaks this covenant, whatever happened to this animal, it's going to happen to you. I think I'd make my payments, wouldn't you? And so I love that one. In other words, God is saying, I'm going to keep my word. Abram needed that, didn't he? You ever need reassurance in your own life? Even though you're a faithful Christian, you ever need some reassurance? That's one of the greatest things about Wednesday nights, isn't it? Where we can come together. We need this. Need this in the middle of the week. And it's good to be reassured by God at every opportunity we have. So it's not just getting together, but also studying His Word, praying to Him, talking with Him. These are ways that we get reassured. We're not going to have God come down between animals like He did with Abram, but this is how He reassures us. And we need that, don't we? And so it's not going to be through Eliezer. Well, then Sarai had her own ideas. Got Hagar, my handmaid, go in with her and have a child. And so that's exactly what Abram did. And Hagar became pregnant. What happened when Hagar became pregnant? What did Sarai think of her idea? No, she didn't like it at all. Here's a woman that's been trying to get pregnant for all of these years with no success. And then seemingly one time with Hagar, she gets pregnant and immediately there's contention. And so from that union, Ishmael was born. He is the father of what race of people, if you can say that? The Arabs. And from the Arabs came what religion? Islam. And so we ask the question, it'd be interesting to think about that if not for this situation, would the religion of Islam even be around today? Well, Genesis chapter 17, Abram's name was changed. In Genesis chapter 17, Abram means exalted father. Exalted father. Abraham means a father of a multitude. So he's telling him again, a father of a multitude. And it was at this time that God introduced circumcision. So he's getting ready. Abraham, and all of his servants, any male in his house, took them all of them were circumcised. And he said, every male born into this house is also going to go through this. This is going to be a sign that you are of Abraham. And so on the 8th day. And incidentally, I'm sure you know this. Why on the 8th day? Aside from what God said, the blood clotting. It's the strongest it'll ever be on that 8th day. Isn't that amazing? How did Abraham know that? He didn't. God did, didn't he? God did. And so every child born there to the house would be circumcised. And what's that going to be a reminder of? My promise to you. My promise to you. You see, the Old Testament is not just something thrown together. And again, by way of recapping, that's the purpose of this class, is to show us from the very first verse of Genesis, as we talked about in our first class together in this quarter, God had Jesus in mind. He had the coming of Christ in mind. That's what it's all about. It's all pointing to that day when Jesus, the Son of God, would come into this world. He would die on the cross and be resurrected. That's what it's all about. And so we're always reminded of that. So now we come to Genesis chapter 18. Any questions before we get to new material now? All right, Genesis chapter 18. And again, I'll remind you of this every week. This is not a verse-by-verse study of the book of Genesis or any book that we're going to study, but we're just trying to show Jesus in the Old Testament, specifically in this particular study, trying to trace that seed, that promised seed. And we come to Genesis chapter 18. Let's start with verse 19. Genesis chapter 18, start with verse 9 rather. Genesis 18, verse 9. Remember, the angels come to visit him. He doesn't know they're angels right off, does he? And so,
In the heat of the day.
in the heat of the day.
Yeah.
And then what does Abraham have his wife do? Start cooking. Start cooking something to eat. Look at verse 9. And they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" So he said, "Here in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son." And I love this parenthesis. He says, Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. So get that picture in your mind. We're not talking about, as we say from time to time, fictitious people. These people actually existed. And what's Sarah doing? She's listening. I can just see her straining her ear. Man, what are these guys talking about? I heard my name. I heard my name. She's listening in the tent door. Verse 11. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age. So when they have to tell you the same thing twice, they were old and then well advanced in age. You're old. That's probably a good way to put it. You know, Jerry, you're not old, you're just well advanced in age. Well advanced in age. Well, that's what we're going to see here. And Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. That's exactly right. So she's past the age of childbearing. And we know all that goes in with that. You know, as a lady, you know when you're past the age of childbearing, for sure. Therefore, verse 12, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" So not only am I old, Abraham's old. He's older than I am. We're both old. Now watch verse 13. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." And then verse 15. But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." When God tells you you are a certain thing, what can you completely 100% be assured of?
He's right.
He's right. You are what he says that you are. You did what he said that you did. You laughed. You can try and fool him, but he knows, doesn't he? He knows. And so she laughed at this. The point we want to make from this is, there's not going to be any doubt, and think about this, that this son was born for a special purpose. A special purpose. Now this is not the virgin birth. First cousin too. That's a good way to put it too. You know, I was trying to think, because it almost feels a little blasphemous to say this is not the virgin birth, but it's awfully close. Can we say it like that? It's miraculous. It's well past childbearing age. This son is coming into this world by supernatural means, with the help from Almighty God. Is anything too hard for God? And so it's no wonder that the Jews were awfully proud of being from his lineage. I mean, these circumstances, that's right. And they let you know that too, didn't they? They let you know that too. All right, so chapter 20. I told you we're going to be skipping some. We have Abraham and Abimelech. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to see where the promise of God is kept. And so I'm not sure exactly how many years take place from chapter 20 to 21. Maybe it'll tell us and give us some clues as we read. But I want us to notice something, it's very close to the time where Sarah is going to become pregnant with Isaac. Very, very close to that time. So we're at a critical moment as far as the seed is concerned. A very critical moment. Now, it's the same thing he did before. And we're going to see Isaac do that too. Well, we probably won't in this study, but Isaac does the same thing later on. But look at chapter 20. And, let's just read a few verses. Very close to the time where Sarah is going to become pregnant with Isaac. And so they come into this land, and Gerar. And verse 2, Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Didn't learn, did he, from the first time? Drop down a little bit to verses 17 and 18. So Abraham, same thing happened. Abimelech said, "Why have you done this? Why'd you lie? This could have been really, really bad." Look at verse 17. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. So what did God do? Not only did he make sure Sarah was going to be protected, but what did he do to all women? Closed up their wombs, didn't he? And so here is Abraham having to pray for Abimelech and all of their people. Verse 18, "For the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." So what is God doing? He's protecting the seed. He's protecting the seed. Abraham and Sarah were wonderful. Isaac is wonderful. We love them. We appreciate them. But is it just about Abraham and Sarah? No, this is about you and me. This is about you and me. God protecting the very thing, the plan that's going to save our souls, isn't it? And so we need to be reading this, not just, well, this is a neat story. Thank God. That's right. Absolutely. Then we come to chapter 21, and with almost a sigh of relief, we finally read in Genesis chapter 21 that at the appointed time, the promised seed is born. Chapter 21, let's start with verse 1. "And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken." He always does, doesn't he? Does what he says. Verse 2, "For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him." You notice how many times it's repeating this? Abraham in his old age. Then look at verse 3. "Called the name of his son who was born to him." And then, to make sure we don't miss it, "whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born." How old was he? He was 100. "And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh at me." Is that what it says? With me. They'll be laughing with me. And then she says this, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age." You know, if you heard a story like this, a 90-year-old woman having a son, what would be your first reaction?
No way.
Shock. And then we would do what we're doing right now. We'd laugh, wouldn't we? You imagine having a son when you're 90 years old? That thought scares me. That thought scares me. Those of you who have grandchildren, what's the best thing about them? You can send them home at the end of the day.
Amen.
From what I understand, 90-year-old people, what an ordeal it would be to have a son. But I tell you another thing about it is, you know, the older you get, the more you appreciate what you had. You know, when you're going through it when you're young, you don't know how quickly it's going to go. But it goes fast, doesn't it? I imagine having a child even now, I would appreciate it more because I know how quickly it's going to go. But here they are, chapter 21. Now we're also going to see that a conflict flares almost immediately between the promised seed and Abraham's other seed. Who comes back into play now? Hagar and Ishmael. We thought this maybe was done, but it's not. And so if we would have taken time to read the rest of chapter 21, which we don't have time for, you can see starting with verse 8, that it continues, the child grew and was weaned. I want us to remember that for what we're going to hit in the next chapter. This child has grown and it was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast. So we're not talking about just a little bitty baby now. The child has grown and... Yeah, that's right. That's what they estimate, at least. And then look at verse 9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Then she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. Sarah, it was your idea. It was your idea. And so what does he end up doing? Now this is important as well. She makes a statement here, and she's right in this. He will not be heir with my seed. And so what does she instruct him to do? Send him away. God talks to Abraham talks to God about it, and God talks to Abraham about it. And what does he end up doing with Ishmael, his other seed? He sends him away. I want you to notice this also. How many times throughout the book of Genesis, especially, and we'll see it in Exodus, that God separates his people, that seed, from the heathens, from those who would try to bring it down. And so, just to make sure that there's no doubt, what does he do with Abraham's other seed? Sends him away. He separates. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. That's right. That's right. Not just Sarah, but it was everybody. It was everybody. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? There's not going to be any doubt. All right. You've done messed up and you don't even know it. So he sends them away and left Isaac as Abraham's only heir. Now, I wanted to get to chapter 22 especially tonight, because here's the greatest test of Abraham's faith. And here is this seed. Now, we've hit this hard, and I'm glad that we have, especially since we come to this chapter. God has made that promise, and look at everything he has done to preserve this and to make sure this promise is kept. All the reconfirmations of it, what he does with those bodies of those animals, what he does with Pharaoh and Abimelech, and everything that we've read up to this point. But now we come to chapter 22 that goes against everything he's done. And we know this chapter well, and again, it's not going to be verse by verse. I wish that we had time, and I wish that we could, because it's hard to pass this up. But look at verse 1. It came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So now what's God telling him to do with this promised seed? Kill him. Kill him. Sacrifice him. Kill him. Then God opened her eyes. Well, I'm sorry, I messed up there. Verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. You know, as irritated as we get with him when it comes to Pharaoh and when it comes to Abimelech, I marvel at him here, don't you? He gets up early in the morning, and we're going to see what he had in mind. Saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, And he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." We will come back to you. Verse 6. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. Who carries the wood? Isaac does. Isaac carries the wood. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, "My father." And he said, "Here am I, my son." Then he said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" If you were this father, how would that question penetrate your heart?
I mean, God's already told Abraham.
Abraham.
What sacrifice.
He knows, doesn't he? And he says, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." So the two of them went together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Now remember, are we talking about a 2-year-old?
No.
Talking about a young man here, aren't we? Does it appear that Isaac is trusting his father?
Yes.
Did we find that he fought him, that he lays him on the altar upon the wood? And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son.
Probably had it drawn back like
Yeah. What would you feel? And you can't answer this question, I can't either, because we've never done this.
no.
But that had to just be the worst moment of his life, didn't it?
He was well over 100 years.
That's right. That's right. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." So he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Then verse 13, Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide," as it is to this day. "In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." Keep your finger there and put your ribbon there. Look at Hebrews chapter 11. Then we're going to make some points about this. Hebrews chapter 11. This is so much more than just about Abraham and Isaac. This, what we've just read, should bring to your mind another father who willingly offered his son.
And his son
Didn't fight.
Did not go against.
That's right. Not my will, but thine be done. It ought to automatically, those of us who know the story of the Bible, that just ought to take our mind here, shouldn't it? And then watch this. Hebrews chapter 11. Start with verse 17. By faith, Abraham, see the Bible now in the New Testament is telling us what Abraham was thinking all the way back there in Genesis 22. When he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Does that sound familiar? Of whom it was said, "In Isaac your seed shall be called." What's he reminding him? What's he thinking? Concluding that, verse 19, that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. What was Abraham thinking on that mountain? God was going to raise him up. What was Abraham expecting to have to do? But what did he have faith that God was able to do? To raise him up from the dead. He's going to have to. Because he promised. So if you're going to have me kill him, then the only logical explanation is you're going to raise him from the dead. And so you read about things like this. Dan, go ahead.
You know, it's interesting. I know we've all seen movies, you know, of this particular thing with Abraham. It's unfortunate that the one I seen showed him as if he was really struggling and just, why, Lord? And, you know, and I'm shaking my head thinking, no, no, no. Because he told them, servants, I and the lad will return.
We will be back. That's right. It absolutely is important. Yeah. You think his son trusted the Father? So what's this all about? Is it just a neat story? That we look at Abraham and think, man, what a man he was. And he was, don't get me wrong. Or just how wonderful Isaac was for this. What are we talking about? There's so many things in here that ought to make you see Jesus, make us see Jesus in almost every verse of chapter 22. Jerry?
You could say God is in the affairs of man.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mankind.
Absolutely.
He is in our affairs.
We talk about types and shadows, and I know you probably all have heard that. And I didn't want this study to be just about that, because we could look at Noah. I mean, and it's so tempting to do that in every Bible character that we come to in the Old Testament, but we've got to do it here. Let's just look at some similarities, some comparisons between the offering up of Isaac in sacrifice found in Genesis chapter 22 and the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. Listen to just a few of these, and you might be able to add to these. If you do, feel free. Isaac and Jesus were the only begotten sons of a righteous father. Remember, Ishmael had been sent away. Both Isaac and Jesus are identified as the son of Abraham. Genesis 21 verse 3, and chapter 22 verse 2, and Matthew 1:1. Both were offered in sacrifice. Well, you can say, well, he wasn't really offered in sacrifice, but what does it say in Hebrews 11? He was, in a figurative sense, he was raised from the dead. He was raised from the dead, and figuratively. Genesis 22 verse 2, and then John 1:29, and several other verses. The sacrifice was offered in the land of Moriah, which is Jerusalem, Genesis 22 verse 2, Matthew 16, 21 through 23. And then this is the one that gets me. Both sons carried the wood for their own sacrifice. Wow. Genesis 22, 6 and John 19, 17. Isn't that cruel? Both were bound and placed on top of the wood. Genesis 22, 9 and John 19, 18 through 19. Philippians 2, verse 8. Both willingly allowed themselves to be offered in sacrifice. Genesis 22. Look at Colossians chapter 2. This is the fastest 35 minutes or whatever it is of my week. Colossians chapter 2. Look at verses 6 through 8. As you therefore have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. Walk in him. Both sons were resurrected or given back to their fathers on the third day. Did you catch that? What day did they get to the mountain? Third day. That's right. Let's quickly just do this. I told you we were going to finish. Let me try to keep my word. Later, God confirmed this covenant with Isaac. The same covenant that he made with Abraham. Let me give you that. Genesis 26, verses 3 through 5. It's interesting, in the next verses, we read the account of Isaac going to live in Gerar with his wife Rebekah, and the seed was threatened again, and he lied. Later on, it was reiterated to Jacob, not Esau. Genesis 25, verse 23. That's what God wanted. In a dramatic way, you remember God affirmed his covenant with Jacob while he was on his way to Haran to seek a wife. Genesis 28, 13 through 15. Then it was threatened again. Jacob was going to take a wife. Who did he want?
He wanted Rachel.
He wanted Rachel. Who did he get?
Leah.
Leah. He had to continue to work until he got Rachel. It was not Reuben, the eldest son, who received the promise.
Yeah.
Well, it was Judah who received it, who would be designated as the seed. So there's a lot of history there in about 30 seconds. But you just see, it continues to go. It continues to go. Lord willing, next week we're going to talk about how the seed is protected from the famine and where they end up. In captivity, that's right. You've read the story before, haven't you? That's exactly right. He's protecting them. He's protecting his people. All right, thank you all so much. Let's get ready to sing songs of praise and talk to our Father in prayer and hear a good lesson tonight.
Glad you guys are here.